Hey everyone, and welcome to Chef AJ Live. I'm your host, Chef AJ, and this is where I introduce you to amazing people like you who are doing great things in the world that I think you should know about. Today's guest is Nan Simonsen, and she has written a wonderful book called Aging Powerfully. She's going to talk about her book, but she's also going to do a culinary demo. Nan does the culinary demos for my doctor, Dr. Wayne Dysinger, who is an amazing lifestyle medicine doctor in Riverside, California. He also does telemedicine, and he's been on the show, as has Nan, talking about how lifestyle medicine works. It's the coolest practice because they do classes with you all the time. And so Nan does these amazing cooking demos, and I'm like, well, do one on my show. People have to see what it is you do. You know, a lot of guests don't want me to say their age, but in this case, we are very proud to say her age because she has turned 70 this year and she looks amazing and she's an amazing chef. Please welcome her to the show. It's so nice to have you in my house.
Thank you, Chef AJ. And hello, everyone. I'm so honored to be here, Chef AJ. Thank you very much for inviting me. And I'll talk about why I'm perfectly fine with people mentioning my age, because it was a launch, actually. That entire knowing I was going to be 70 became my impetus to consider a book and write the book and look forward to decades to go. Well, we'll hit that later. I am going to start, before I do anything else, with this Instapot to get the rice going, because it cooks 24 minutes, 25 minutes before, and then it sits for a while. I want to make sure it's ready. And there's a process that I have already done before we began for this rice, which is dry sautéing. There is onion, there's garlic. I dry sautéed it, but I want you to see this because it's one of the most important principles of whole food, plant-based, and SOS free. Part of the SOS I'm absolute on, and that is I don't eat sugar and I don't use oil. The other S, salt, you're going to see that there's the option of that in my recipes. When, for example, last night I did a birthday party for my daughter, 29 years old, and I wanted the food, because they're not used to low salt, to be, well, it was low salt as opposed to no salt at all. I guess my ego came in to play because I knew that they're so used to their, I'm going to say, fast food ways, that anything other than a salt shaker leaves them feeling deprived, but I put a little bit in. So all of that to say, when I make a meal, almost everything, a lot of things, casserole, soups, and things like that, begin with a saute of onions and garlic, and maybe a mirepoix, which is onions, garlic, carrot, celery, base for a lot of French food. And none of that is sauteed in this house because it's maybe sauteed, but not with oil. So I'm going to show you that process because I want you to see it in the next dish I do. Then you'll be able to see it. But I started with this, and the dry saute is already done so that I can throw this together. I'm making a Spanish rice that's so savory that one of the guests yesterday had last night had 3 servings of it. Now, why would they be eating the rice that I'm making you today? Because I made this identical meal for the guests for my daughter's birthday party. It's actually my husband's, well, you'll hear part of that story, second husband's 29-year-old daughter, and he has one that just turned 30 a month before. So boy, bam, bam. Kids, what is that, 13 months apart? And they're beautiful and accomplished women. We did the party, and when she asked, or when I asked what she would like, and she heard I was making this meal for this presentation on Chef AJ, she said, make that for me. So she got it last night and we're getting it today. I wish you were. I wish you could be right here tasting it, but it doesn't work that way. All right, so I'm adding to it, and so the rice is really good. And my husband, after the meal, said, wow, that hit it out of the park. That was a great meal. A taco meal for a birthday party, hit it out of the park. I'll take that. So I use brown rice. And actually, if this were still hot and the onion was caramelized and the garlic is added later, as you'll see, so that it doesn't get brown, that gets bitter, I would have thrown in the spices then, because it toasts the spices somewhat. And the spices here include hatch chilies. Now, you don't have to use hatch chili. The recipe calls for, and the recipes are all available at nansimonsen.com, the recipe section, and you'll be able to find all of this. nansimonsen.com, Simonsen, and it's spelled in the show notes. I love hatch chili. I just came back from 2 weeks in New Mexico after, a year and a half of no travel. And it's one of my favorite. But you can use any kind of chili powder. You can use ancho, whatever you really like. So there was some hatch chili. There was yesterday a little bit of salt. There's oregano, cumin. Okay, and they toast nicely. Just barely you would do that, but just toast nicely. I also would have added the rice, because sometimes I like the idea of having the rice very lightly toasted. It brings out just a little more flavor. You'll notice this rice is sticking. Why? It's because I always rinse rice. I rinse all my grains and legumes before I cook them. Dry them well. I don't dry, but it's always handy to have strainers nearby, and I like the finer strainers because, for example, if I were doing this with quinoa, and quinoa must be rinsed because there's something, I think it's called saponin, that is bitter and somewhat toxic in quinoa. Well, a strainer any bigger than this would reduce the amount of quinoa that I was using, because it would come right out the bottom. So I keep the strainers handy, and I rinse everything, because grains and legumes sit in silos, and silos could get dusty and things can get in anyway. So I've stirred the rice, the seasonings, the onion. I'm adding to that, and I love Glen because the product is organic, and they also use the cans that are BPA free. And so I'm mixing all of that together. It looks a little like this. And then I'm going to add broth, and vegetable broth. I didn't bring it to a boil, but I warmed it because it'll make this process go a little faster. You can buy vegetable broth. I could have used water, but that wouldn't have been as good. Excuse me. And I make my own. And I want to recommend that you consider that, because you can, now this is just a partial bag in the freezer garage. No, in the garage freezer. There's a full bag, and it's getting to be time for me to pull out my stock pot and make it. But this is, we go to a farm store every Sunday, get carrots out of the ground. The carrot greens go in here. The ends of, even the root ends of onions and spring onions, and the seed portions of bell peppers. And if I don't have carrot peels in here, or carrot stems, I will add carrots when I do my broth. But you can just Google homemade broth, vegetable broth, and come up with some other things to put in here, like bay leaf, maybe even juniper berry, or nothing. But and I have on my website, which leads to my cooking show, even a video on making your own homemade broth. So let me get this in the freezer. Ready to make it now. Okay, so we have 2 1/4 cups of broth, 2 cups of rice. Now, this is that odd. Usually, you would have, in 2 cups of brown rice, you would have at least 4 cups of liquid. But because we're using the Instant Pot, that's not the case. And in case you haven't discovered this in your own Instant Pot, there's a handy little holder on each side. So you get it going. And we're going to, I'm doing this backwards, so I'm not thinking good. I love that sound. That means that I've engaged the cover. I'm going to set it at pressure cook My button is up here on my 8-quart. I have an 8 and a 6-quart. The button is down here for pressure, and I'm going to set it to 24 minutes. That's 25, 24. And then we're just going to leave it alone. Make sure that the pressure release isn't engaged. Now I'm going to move this back here. And just as a note, I wouldn't be doing that if I had to unplug it, or I would have to reset it. But I'll just leave it here for now. And we're going to move on to the next part of our meal. And there we go. All right. So consider making your own broth. It's easy to do. Strain it. I bought one quart bottles because I just think it looks super cool that way. And I use it all the time, and I even drink it because it actually has protein in it. I was trying to prove to a group of patients at the clinic at Lifestyle Medical who worry about giving up, animal product, fearing that they won't get enough protein. That's a really old story as it relates to people who have gone plant-based, because everybody worries about our protein. And I was adding it up. Oh, it was one of my, you can find this recipe on my website. It's the one for buckwheat mushroom risotto. And even when I made that dish, I thought, boy, it's just a grain with some mushroom. I probably should have some other protein sources in the meal, and there are plenty. But I added up the protein just with the mushrooms and the onions. The onions alone were 5 grams of protein. The broth was 5 grams of protein, vegetable broth. So we get protein in so much when we are plant-based. Now I'll tell you a little more about myself. I'm Nan Simonsen. I am a health and lifestyle coach with Lifestyle Medical, a family practice clinic in Riverside, California, in Redlands, California. But we've also partnered with 3 other, one in Delaware, one in Texas, and I believe in Minnesota. We're looking at another partnership. And if this all works well with Medicare coverage and all of that, we may expand. So keep looking for a lifestyle medical doctor, because they and we in this kind of a practice are so different in that we want you to walk in and be, I'll say, healed, either prevented from or healed with our modalities, or maybe even find a way to reverse some really bad chronic diseases. And chronic diseases are basically lifestyle diseases in 70%, 80% of the time. So I, as a health coach and lifestyle coach, talk about those modalities. I talked about them in my book, and I work with patients to that end. And I do a cooking class once a month. And the name of the cooking class is Recipes for Longevity, because if we eat enough of the right foods, I was going to say we can last forever. That's not true, but we can go on for a while. Let me get this started, and then I'll kind of go back and forth with my conversations on all of this. So I have an induction pan. Oh, this is funny. I wanted to tell people at one of my last classes that if a magnet would stick to the pan, it will work with an induction cooker. That's how you know. This is a scan pan. I love this brand, and you can tell when something comes off of it, the thing just turns itself off. With the stick-free, non-stick surfaces can be dangerous to cook on. For example, Teflon was poisonous. And there have been other replacements, but from what I understand, one of the best is the titanium ceramic. And Scan Pan is one that I heard recommended, I think, by Tammy at Nutmeg Notebook. And I don't know if Chef AJ uses it, but I love the brand. It's a Danish brand. They're a little pricey, but I trust them and I like them. But if you Google top 5 safe non-stick cookware brands, you'll see Scan Pan somewhere in there. And then there are others that are less expensive. Anyway, so I have a couple of scan pans, and I put one on once for a cooking class, and darn thing didn't heat. And I don't know why, but that particular pan must not have had the same alloy on the bottom. So if a magnet sits, the funny part was I held it up, I grabbed a magnet from the refrigerator, I put it on, and the darn thing melted on there because it had a plastic top on it. So test it when it's cool. Well, it wouldn't get hot if it wasn't going to work. Okay, so I'm cooking on this induction cooker, and I'm going to do what I had mentioned earlier, and that is show you a how to dry saute. Let me grab my materials, and we'll take it away. So this next recipe was inspired by something I saw in one of the magazines that you get when you go shopping at certain stores. It was inspired by it, and then I just kind of got carried away and added a lot of my own things to it. All right. But this is taco filling, and I had fun last night not telling them what it was, but having them guess. And nobody could guess everything, but they kind of came close. You know what? I'm going to turn this off because there's no reason to have it on until I'm ready to throw things in. So I'm going to pull over my Cuisinart. All right. So what goes in this filling instead of, well, oh God, I was going to say meat, obviously, or any of the meat type products, which I don't use any of those. And that's why I don't identify myself as a vegan. I identify myself as whole food plant-based, very much after what and why T. Colin Campbell uses that term, which he adopted back in the 80s or the early 90s, because one is a philosophical, being vegan is philosophical, that's wonderful. And I too believe that we shouldn't eat animals and that our planet is being damaged by it. But that's not why I started, but more importantly, whole food says a heck of a lot more than just not eating animals. Whole food means that you're eating as close to nature as possible. T. Colin Campbell, who came from a ranching family, changed his belief from you must have animal protein to no, you shouldn't, and used the term whole food plant-based for exactly that reason. So I don't use and I don't recommend unless you just can't live without meat, and the only thing that'll help you transition is to have what's similar to meat, and that is the soy products and some of the other products that are made to taste like meat, because those are highly processed. And just like, a fast food restaurant can take any ingredient and keep messing with it until it almost becomes addictive with the combination of salt, oil, and sugar, but also with the chemicals that make it, and the spices or seasonings or the dough conditioners or whatever they put in it, they could make it very hard not to stop eating it. Well, I want, and we want, foods as close to nature as possible. So those imitation meats are fine for transition, but they are still a soy isolate, a food that's stripped out and then replaced, leaving behind, unfortunately, some of the most important ingredients or components of that food. So this taco is made with cauliflower. Then we add, for some extra flavor, and if you've not used this before, I just love the name of it, chipotle. Oh, shoot. I heard that and I didn't know what was happening, and it was the Instant Pot just coming to pressure. I'll tell you a little Instant Pot story. I bought one, 2 years ago, and I didn't use it for 6 months. It intimidated me and it scared me, and I didn't know what to do with it. It looked too complicated. It's so not complicated, but I so highly recommend it because it's an easy way to cook. You can start things and walk away and they're going to finish themselves. For example, my oat groats, couldn't live without oat groats, love the oat groats. Use them a lot of times instead of rice, always organic and gluten-free. But in any case, that you start in here and walk away and let it lose pressure or decrease pressure for 2 hours after you make it. I've got that recipe on my website, and that I got from Nutmeg Notebook as well. Okay, so what I've just done is I have 3 cups of cauliflower, and I put in chipotle and adobo, and that's what I was going to talk to you about. And that is, it's a cool kind of a name, chipotle chilies in adobo sauce. And the adobo sauce is kind of a smoky kind of a sauce. And when you buy it in a little can, and the can may only be 6 ounces. There are a lot of them in there. So what I do, and there are a number of small containers that have seals. This happens to be from Tupperware. And one of these, they're called smidgets. And one of them holds 4 chilies and some adobo sauce. And so I open it for a recipe, and then I pack these in, and it's handy to have them in the freezer because otherwise it sits in the refrigerator too long and may not stay flavorful. I'm bouncing this around just to get the chipotle mixed with the cauliflower. Then I'm adding the other ingredients, and they include, oh, that's what I wanted to do. Okay, that's why I started this. Let me think. Yeah, let me do that. Okay, let me get this heated up, and I'll do my saute, and you'll be able to see that. But I'm going to go ahead and mix this since I've already started. Then I'm adding to it mushrooms. That was my addition because I thought, oh, mushrooms would be marvelous in this. And I'm still trying to think. I read Chef AJ, I'm reading Unprocessed again. And in Unprocessed, she uses a lot of sun-dried tomato powder. I've never even thought of that. The dry tomatoes and then put them in either a high power blender or a coffee grinder, as long as they're not oil packed and they're dry. And they're extremely flavorful. And you can get the little packs inexpensively at a lot of stores, including Trader Joe's. And I think that would be good in here too, either the powder or even better yet, pieces of sun-dried tomato, but I haven't tried that yet. Okay, so I have walnuts, mushrooms, and cauliflower with chipotle in adobo. And then I have some other seasonings that will go in as well. And we'll get to that. And I'm going to bounce it around just a little bit. What I don't want to do, and if you've used a food processor and you do the pulse, what's happening is the food is going in and coming up and going in. And I'm just doing this long enough. See, I'm seeing it go into the vortex. Yeah. That's what I want. I don't want this to be so finely chopped that the texture is too fine. It's nice to hit bits of nut, and it's nice to hit bits of cauliflower as well. So I'm going to put that aside. And as far as the mushrooms go, you can buy them whole, wash them and chop them yourself. I bought these at Trader Joe's, the sliced primini. And what's convenient about this, you don't use the whole bag because 2 cups is only about, I'm going to say maybe 2/3 of the bag, is that they're already washed. And that's rather handy. And chop them just in a chunky way so that I could measure them, because I was measuring 2 cups, and if they're in 2 big pieces, the measurement isn't going to be all that accurate. So I've heated my Scan pan, and I'm going to throw into, probably a little too hot, I'm going to throw into this hot pan diced onion. And this is a half of a white onion. Actually, I usually buy the Hawaiian, what they call sweet onion, and it's not really sweet, but that's what they call it. It's I like that flavor. And this is some broth that I put. Oh, okay. Just mention something else. You know that I when I make my broth, I put it into the 1 quart container, and then I freeze the rest in 4-cup measurements. Well, I just defrosted some because I knew I needed it for today. But this was what was left in the bottle. It came up to about here. Don't mix the two, because if this has been around 4 or 5 days and this is newly out of the freezer, I don't want any, I was going to say oldness. I hate to use the word bacteria, but it's true. I don't want anything that's starting to turn this, because it'll last about 7 days, but it doesn't last forever, to go into a bottle of broth that just came out. Okay. So what's happening, and this would happen if I were using a conventional pan as well. It just is a cleaner kind of a method if it's nonstick. And yesterday, when I did this for the birthday party, I used a wok, the carbon steel wok. And that doesn't have a nonstick surface, and it worked beautifully. What's starting to happen, can you see this? The onion is starting to brown. Okay. What I'm going to do, and there's particles down, sort of stuck to the bottom. I don't want it to burn. I want it to lightly brown. Now watch what happens when I put this in. Do you see how it's bubbling? What it's doing is deglazing the pan. And by deglazing the pan, I'm distributing that caramel flavor. I'm partially steaming the onion, and I'm going to let it dry out again. And I'll do this twice. The second time is when I'll add the garlic. Garlic doesn't have the same amount of moisture that onion does. Onion has a lot of moisture, and it will caramelize nicely. Garlic will actually burn, and when garlic burns, it gets bitter. You can see this is getting darker. Now, why am I doing any of this? Who cares? Well, it's because did I turn it off? It's because the caramelization, the slight browning of the onion gives it more flavor. It's just better. And by cooking it to a point of being translucent, it softens its flavor as well. It takes a little bit of the bite out. Okay, now it's starting to stick a little bit. I'm going to do this one more time. That's why the recipe says on it, use a half or a quarter to a half a cup of broth, partly for the dry saute. Now I'm going to throw in the garlic, chopped garlic. And by the way, I chop my garlic using a product that I really like, a Tupperware product called the Mini Chop. Chef AJ has shown it.
Yeah, is it the one from Tupperware, the one where you just pull it?
Yeah. It's in her store, and boy, oh boy, do I recommend this.
It makes life easier. You know, just one question from previous people were asking you about grain soaking.
About what?
Grain soaking, why you soak your grains.
I don't soak them. I rinse them.
Rinse them, excuse me.
Yeah. I don't soak them. I would love to soak and start not fermenting and start sprouting grains and legumes, but I haven't gotten there. I just haven't done that, even though I'll buy sprouted grains. But yeah, I just rinse them. I rinse them because if you consider where a grain comes from the plant, it's milled by a machine, it's picked by a machine, shucked, whatever, and it sits in a silo before it's used. And I just think it's cleaner just to have it rinsed off. And that's why I said in some things like quinoa, you rinse because you have to. But let me, oh, okay. I'll talk about that in a minute, but I'm going to throw this in there because do you see how beautifully brown this is? Very nice. I'm going to put a little bit of broth and I'm going to throw this in. This has such a nice texture. So I gave, and this will serve a lot of people. If you worry about the amount of nuts that are in here, it's 2 cups of walnuts. You think, holy smokes, that's a lot of calories. That's a lot of fat. I don't count calories. I don't add fat to anything that I eat, but I do eat fatty foods, meaning that I eat avocados. I can do that and keep my weight down. But if I gain a pound or 2, guess what's the first thing to go? Nuts, avocado, nuts, seeds. Well, actually, I always have a tablespoon or 2 of flax seeds. I make a mix of flax and chia, and that's for my essential fatty acids. But even without that, I'm sort of having this chit chat with AJ as I'm speaking, because I know I believe this is true, AJ. Even without flax seeds and chia seeds, your omega-3s are stellar because the amount of greens that you eat. Correct?
Absolutely. Everybody's different. They should get it checked, but I have Dr. Dysinger check it every year and they're fine or they're high. So I'm not going to worry about it for now.
So I do have the flax and the chia, and I also have about probably an ounce. I don't know. There's a little container we keep on the counter, something I got in Italy, a small covered dish, and we keep nuts in there. And just before dinner, when my husband comes home, we'll have like a few. I always have some selenium because I don't mean selenium, Brazil nuts, because they have selenium. And I'll have a little bit of walnut that's the highest in omega-3. And I don't know, maybe a few almonds. And that's how I eat my nuts. But again, that's what goes if I find that I am putting on weight. Otherwise, I'm pretty well at one of the lowest weights I've been since I was a teenager. I'm 5'2", I'm 114, and I stay that way. But if I get up to 116, boing, I'll bring it right back again. And that doesn't happen very often. But sometimes we all get carried away. That's the thing. The more of something that we have that is tempting, the easier it is to keep going back toward it. I bought Jack LaLanne's book. I found it online somewhere. And he says, if it tastes good, spit it out.
I love him. You know, I interviewed his wife on the show, one of my favorite moments. And he used to say the only good part of the donut is the hole.
That's right. Yeah. That's right. Anyway.
Well, I agree about temptation. That's why I say if it's in your house, it's in your mouth. Mae West used to say, I can resist anything but temptation.
And actually, I quote you all the time, AJ, when I'm speaking to patients at the clinic or any private clients. I say all the time, Chef AJ says if it's in your house, it's in your mouth. So don't keep it in there. Oh, you know what I did? Chatty, and left behind, but I can put this in. The seasonings that go into this include chili powder, cumin, salt, or no salt. And in this case, I didn't use salt. I used it yesterday's, but I didn't today. And I'm putting all of that in, and I'll mix it in. So what I'm doing now is I'm just letting this heat up and marry flavors and cook the cauliflower and mushrooms, but mainly the cauliflower, so that it's not crunchy, but that it still has some texture. Get this mixed, cover it up, and then we'll leave this alone until later. All right, I think that's perfect. My husband comes home every day for lunch. He is a CPA and tax attorney, and he just finished that most challenging of times, that extension period, tax season. And we don't go out to lunch because we don't trust or want to deal with a lot of the food that is available. It's kind of hard to get a really clean meal. And so he's coming home for lunch today, and I told him he can't come home until after, well, whatever. I said 12:15 in case I run over, because I was giving myself an hour. But Chef AJ said we can go a little longer. So we'll see what happens. But let me tell you about this. This is super cool. Two things that I love. And I'm just going to show you because I think this is worth knowing. If you buy garlic this way, I buy organic garlic, and I buy the big heads. There are 3 cloves of garlic in here, 3 cloves of garlic in the rice. So I use a lot of garlic. And being Italian, I grew up on garlic and olive oil. The olive oil doesn't have a place in my kitchen anymore, but the garlic certainly does. It's an allium. And if you follow Joel Furman, that's one of his G bombs, onions. And that means any allium like garlic or onion or shallot or leek or scallions, on and on. So this is really cool. These big pieces are easy to peel, especially if you have something like this. And I found this, I don't know if AJ has this in her store, but it's a handy thing, and it's on Amazon. As long as the garlic is fresh enough that the skins aren't so dehydrated that they won't move, look what happens. I roll it, and the garlic is completely peeled. I'll do that again. Take another piece, roll it, and so what happened yesterday is I had an entire head of this, and it's about 16, 18 pieces of garlic, cloves. And I very quickly rolled them. Now, if sometimes there's a woody stem end, and I'll cut that off, but this is so fresh that it's not woody at all. Then, and now I can show you what we were talking about, throw it in here. And so I threw in 16, 17 of them yesterday. And pull this cord, and we have chopped garlic. And I took the time to measure 1 tablespoon. Well, let me back up. 1 teaspoon is 1 clove of garlic. And because with something this big, you can't go with a recipe that says 1 clove when my cloves are twice the size of what your clove might be. So just to know, 1 chopped clove is 1 teaspoon. So in each of these, I put a tablespoon of chopped garlic. And I just keep it in a little glass jar in the refrigerator for the week. And that way I can very easily spoon out my, my garlic as I need it. Okay, so now I think we're on, this is doing its thing. Let me take you to the next segment. So what I was making today was Spanish rice for our Mexican taco meal. Also, I'm going to show you vegan sour cream and pico de gallo, because you want those as a side. And we're doing a guilt-free chocolate pudding that I got. Well, actually, I got it a couple of years ago when I went to a conference in Ohio, and it was a wellness forum of Pam Poppers, and her chef Del Souf calls this guilt-free chocolate pudding. And I'll say something about that as well, because even though it's guilt-free because it's whole food and it is plant-based, if I ate this every day, I would be, well, cutting back on fat wouldn't be enough, because in other words, it's just so rich, calorie dense, that it is not something I find that I can do every day. I pretty well stay with what Chef AJ talks about in unprocessed, and Barbara Roll talks about in caloric density, as does Joel Furman, and that is keeping caloric density and the foods that I will eat, well, almost ad libitum, meaning as often as I want, as much as I want to be properly satisfied, at that 600 calorie a pound or less. It's really 567 or 76 or something like that, but I rounded off to 6. And that means that as a whole food plant-based, in a whole food plant-based realm, we're eating vegetables and fruits and tubers and grains and legumes. The seeds and nuts are higher, but those are above that 600. But if we stay in that first realm, we can eat until satisfied. And my husband and I all the time say, we love our food. People that are eating differently have no idea what they're missing out on because we eat as much as we want. We're both at our good and low weight, and we have such diversity and such remarkable health outcomes over where we were when we started almost 3 years ago with plant-based diet, that it's become my mission. And I'll show you this next series of maneuvers, and then I'll talk a little bit more about that. Chef AJ, are there any questions?
Let me look. I've been so busy watching your demonstration. I haven't been watching the chat. Well, TS said, can you get Chipotle chilies without the salt? And I don't think so, but a guest I had on recently named Felicia Slattery had a book, and there was a recipe for how to make your own without salt.
Really? I don't know about that. Okay. I haven't thought about that because that is true. If you get the Chipotle in adobo, it is going to have salt. And if I had my can here, which I didn't because I've had this in the freezer for a while, then I would look it up. But my guess is it's pretty heavily salted. Most of those condiments are. Okay. All right. I'm keeping this warm. I don't want it to cook now. I just want it to stay warm. All right. So I'm going to show you. We'll get our dessert made now. And this is so simple and so delicious. All right. And this is the guilt-free chocolate pudding that Del Soap puts together. And the reason I'm doing this because my little container spilled out and lost a little bit of my powder. And it's actually precious powder because I followed many of Chef AJ's recommendations for really excellent flavor when it comes to cooking and baking. And I bought wild vanilla powder, gluten-free, no GMO, paleo, vegan.
Isn't it delicious though? I mean, I don't make any money if you buy vanilla powder, but it's so bad. It's so much better. It just is.
But what they do is they take that tiny bit of beans in that pod, and they grind that up. Well, it takes a whole bunch of pods to fill this little bag. And so it's kind of silly expensive, but it lasts a long time. I can keep this until the end of 2022. And the flavor is so pure and so lovely. If you don't want to or can't find or just think that's silly, investing in vanilla powder, well, then you can use vanilla extract. His recipe calls for vanilla extract. I use my vanilla powder. So this is what we're doing. One of the things that Dr. Lee showed as a anti-angiogenesis. If you saw yesterday's interview, it was really wonderful. Dr. Lee talks about, It's telling me that the rice is done. Now we just ignore it. And it will be ready. Yeah, the instructions were to let it naturally release, which quite often takes about 20 minutes, 15 to 20 minutes, depends on the food. But I could walk away for a half an hour, 45 minutes, and it's really not going to make a difference. So the rice is ready. Okay. One of the things he showed was anti-angiogenesis. Angiogenesis is the development of blood vessels. If we have rampant growth of, well, I'm saying that wrong. One of the things that will allow cancer to not only take hold, but also spread like crazy is the development of blood vessels. And so anti-angiogenic foods are those that don't encourage the development of blood vessels in that way. And you would think, well, of course you want blood vessels. You need them if you hurt yourself and your healing process requires it. This is different, and it is, this is one way. This is something that they have shown, and they have medications for now to stop angiogenesis as it relates to the quelling of illnesses of a lot of kinds, including cancer. One of the things on his list is soy, and I happen to use soy a lot. I follow Christy Funk, F-U-N-K-K-R-I-S-T-I, who is the breast surgeon of the stars, and she became vegan, I want to say 15, 17 years ago, when as a breast surgeon, she was tired of seeing people coming back with cancers again and again, or getting cancers at young ages. And her research told her that a plant-based diet, whole food plant-based diet, was the way to prevent many cancers, including breast cancer. And so she went in, this is a cute story, to her house and said, boy, she had two boys at that time, we're going vegan. And they said, yay. And then they said, what does that mean? Or what is vegan? Well, immediately she converted her family to a whole food plant-based diet. And she talks to her patients about the value of soy as it relates to an anti-cancer beneficial food. So I'm using silken tofu in this dessert, which means that we're adding protein to the dessert. The part that is super rich and that makes it a bit of a problem is that it also has 1 cup of date paste. You can use Chef AJ's date paste. I have a date paste on my website. It's my favorite date paste. What is date paste? It is a whole food that is plant-based. It's dates that are soaked and then whirled in a blender with water. That's it. And so you get dates which are high in magnesium, potassium, fiber, B vitamins, especially B6. You get a beautiful whole food. It's somewhat caramel flavored, and it's quite delicious. But again, this is not a low-calorie dessert, and it is a healthier dessert than getting some packaged pudding that has unidentifiable ingredients. But by the same token, it's a treat. And
Nan TS wants to know, what kind of food processor do you have?
oh, isn't this the cutest little thing? I found this, I don't know where. It's a Cuisinart. It's a Cuisinart tiny thing. And I did go online once and look it up. And I think it was like $40 or $50. I found it at a store for some great price and couldn't help myself and bought it. And now it's become one of my favorite because the new Cuisinarts, if you use them, they're hard to clean. They have all these openings that get wet and you can't get anything in there to dry them. So I don't like that part about them. And yet I love having a food processor. this one's much easier to clean. I just added cinnamon and the recipe. The rest, again, nansimonsen.com recipes. This is under the dessert and under miscellaneous. And I would imagine, I believe that Chef AJ also has a recipe for her date paste. As a matter of fact, I know she does. I think it's in, I don't know if it's in unprocessed or if it's in weight loss. I don't know.
Date paste is in unprocessed.
Oh, okay. All right. And then I'm adding 1/3 of a cup of cocoa. Now, this is a chocolate pudding, and you might be thinking, well, now you're totally blowing it because cocoa is chocolate. No, cocoa is a defatted portion of chocolate that is not only decently high in fiber and protein, but it's also an antioxidant. It's only 20 calories per tablespoon. So if I were making, like if this dessert will feed 4 people, I have 20 calories of cocoa in here that makes it taste like I'm eating a chocolate bar. It's really, really good. Now, this is kind of a noisy thing. I pitched, and it's so what do I have in here? Again, the silken tofu, I have the cocoa, and I have date paste, and that's all. I'm going to stir it down. I believe, because Del Chauve on this recipe, and I just used his recipe, had the nutritional value broken down. And I'm pretty sure that for 4 people, each half cup portion, so it would feed more than 4, was like 115 calories and had 8 grams of protein. And 4 or 5 grams of fiber. Okay. So I'm going to do this 2 more times. Sorry for the annoying noise. And I have another recipe that does this same process, so I'm not going to do it again because I can simply explain, now that you've seen what this looks like, what I'm doing and why. You'll understand what I mean when I talk about this next recipe. I want it to be so well blended that there are no specks. And maybe had I used a larger food processor, that would have taken less time, but this last one will take care of it. Okay. And if you want a recommendation for super spatulas, I think it was Ann Esselstyn who talks about these on her cooking channel. Done. All right. But they're tovolo, and I just love them. They're firm and rigid inside. It's silicone, so silicone's good for food as well as even hot foods. That's why what I've been using for my spatula is also silicone, but they're soft on the edges, and so they work beautifully as a spatula as well as a stirring tool. All right. I'm going to just put this just the way it is in the refrigerator, and we'll spoon it out in just a minute. Okay, so what was I referring to when I said for the next recipe? Well, the next recipe is vegan tofu, vegan sour cream. And when I began making this, my husband wouldn't touch it because he has always been into health and fitness, and he associated sour cream with something that you just don't mess with. Why have that much fat added to a food and then feel that you can't eat the food without that added to it? It took me a while to convince him that this was very different, because actually, because it uses tofu, it's a protein source, and the only ingredients in it, and I'll show it to you. I'm not going to need that again, because I'm not going to make it again, because the process is identical. Just a moment. What I'm talking about is, what is that? 3, 4 ingredients, is the tofu sour cream. Oh, I love the smell. It looks like this. And it is very low fat, because this tofu has only a couple, well, I shouldn't say very low fat, that's not true. If 1 serving of tofu has 2 grams of fat, that's 18 calories of fat for 45. This is how you figure it, by the way. When you're looking at a recipe, quite often they'll give you the fat grams as it relates to your total calorie percent or percentage of total calories. That's not a good way of looking at it. I think a better way of looking at it is just understanding what percentage of that food is actually fat. For example, and you'll read that soy is a higher fat legume, but I don't mind eating my fat as long as I'm quite aware of where it's coming from, and I'm very comfortable with the fat in legumes. But 1 serving, 45 calories, is 2 grams of fat. A gram of fat is 8 calories or 9 calories per gram. So 2 grams would be 18 calories. And the number of calories for 1 serving, a 3-ounce serving, is 45. Well, if you look at that percentage-wise, now my math isn't going to be good. 18 calories out of 45 total. It's probably what, 40%, maybe 35%. Somebody else can do that, but that's a high percentage of fat. But also you're getting, it's a good source of fat. So I'm comfortable with that. But you'll get a package of something. People all the time will buy a package of, oh, it's like vegetable chips. And this I find I have to talk about all the time when I'm talking to clients and patients. Oh, but it's vegetables. And I'll say the first thing you do is turn it around and look at whether or not it has fat. They almost always have fat. Look at the amount. 1 serving is 100 calories, and there are 10 grams of fat. Well, 10 grams of fat at 9 calories a gram is 90 calories. 90 calories out of 100 total is fat. That's a high fat food. So it's important that you think about and know about these things. I am just going way off on tangents. I'm sorry. Anyway, so here's our vegan sour cream made with tofu. Could you make it with other things? Sure you could. One of my husband's favorite salad dressings looks a lot like this. Oh, I'm going to show you. It's easy to find, as I saw, because I have a lot of things in the refrigerator. Well, you can't really see it that well. Look. It's a vegan ranch style dressing. And you know what the base of this is? This is his favorite salad dressing. I like one of Chef AJ's better, and that's my favorite salad dressing. But this one is made with potato. It's a potato base with some vegan yogurt I use a cashew yogurt forager, not much of it, and then plant milks and some other seasonings. That's also on my channel, but that's way off on another subject. All right, now finally, let's put this meal together. How are we doing? Oh. To release the steam, there's a little button on the newer one. Some of the older ones have a little dial. And as soon as the steam releases, we're good to go. I'm going to show you what this meal looks like when put together.
That looks so realistic.
What?
Looks so realistic.
What's that?
The taco filling.
Yes, it does. It's chunky. It smells great. Just great. This is the hard part. Okay, hold on. No, I know it. I'll simply spoon it in. I was going to turn it out, but I can't do that with this pan. And it does. It actually, I hate to use the word, no, I won't even say it. You know what it looks like in the animal kingdom. Well, now you're wondering what I'm talking about. It looks like ground beef. Now I can lift it. All right. But the texture is wonderful. My pile is starting to raise up from the sink. I'm going to get this out of the way because we're finished with it. All right. So we have our meat. We have our rice. And what I want to recommend you do with the rice is fluff it with a fork. Here. You can see the tomato is on top. Fluff it with a fork rather than mashing it around. All right. I'm left-handed, so I have to do the heady stuff with my left hand. And the rice that I served yesterday, I really felt that I was sacrificing quality by giving them frozen rice. And what I mean is, when I first experimented with this recipe, there was a lot left. You can see how much there is here, and I'm not even putting everything in. Turn it off. All right. So I had a lot of it, and I put some in a freezer container and froze it. And what I served them yesterday was from the freezer, and I thought, oh man, I don't want to make another thing of rice, and so I'm going to give it to them, but boy, it's probably not going to be very good. It was wonderful. It was just wonderful. One of the things that you'll want to do, well, I'll show you with the meat. How do you get your tortillas warm? This is what I do whenever we do a party. I use Mi Rancho tortillas. They're organic, they're gluten-free, and they have the thin credibles. And I love this. And again, I don't count calories. I eat a lot of whole foods, big, huge salads, and lots of starches, mainly legumes and grains and tubers. But I'm still quite aware of caloric density. So one of these is 70 calories. Well, one of their thin credibles, or thin edibles is what they're called, thin edibles, one of them is 35 calories. So when I have tacos, I have 3 tacos, because 3 of these is what, 105 calories, as opposed to one of these being 70. And my husband will have 3 of these. But what I do is I heat them. I have a Breville oven, just like Chef AJ does. Love my Breville air frying oven. And I wrap them in foil, and I'll put 5 in I'll do it when we are entertaining at 350 for about 15 minutes. I've just had this in here for quite a while on a very low temperature. But let's see what's going to happen when we put this meal together. All right.
Do you cook every night?
What my favorite thing to do is to cook, well, batch cook, is to make soups and stews and baked potatoes. I do once a week. Grains I do once a week, and then I assemble. I'm pretty sure this is what you do too, Chef AJ, and that is you just assemble ingredients that become a meal, but the ingredients are already put together. I think I'd have to shoot myself if I had to do all of this every night. But this, for example, this meal could last for days. This could be frozen. The rice, I've just told you, could be frozen. This is a putting out the condiments, putting them together is actually one of the more time-consuming things of this meal. But let's see, I need to get this here. And I want to encourage you as it relates to whole food, plant-based, but also offering a meal that gives people as much fiber and as much healthy whole food as possible. Consider jicama. If you haven't bought jicama, it looks like this. It's just a tuber, like a potato. When you slice it, it's white. When I bought some from a farm store, the Hispanic owner said, oh, cut off the ends just a tiny bit. And I didn't do it with this one. Slice a little, put it in water and soak it in water. It'll absorb more moisture. Didn't do this with this one, but it's just delicious. So again, this is what it looks like sliced. But if you put out jicama and you sprinkle it with chili powder, oh my gosh, it's so good. So last night I had a plate, a large platter with the jicama and some slices of mango. And that was the appetizer. And then we had, I found these online. I thought they were neat. You could either do 3 tacos or 2. And the first time I made this, I used cabbage cups, and put those in here and then filled the cabbage cups. It was easier to handle. But if we were doing that today, we could load it this way. This is one of the thin credibles, and this is the regular size. So what I was saying earlier is my husband will be coming home and he gets the identical meal he got last night, but he didn't mind that at all. He really liked it. All right, so what do I have here? I have, let me turn it this way. The spoons are facing you. I have pico de gallo. Oh, and I didn't do the pico de gallo recipe, but I don't really have to because I was really just going to show you. Pico de gallo is the classic recipe, is simply chopped tomato, onion. I didn't put garlic, but I put some jalapeno pepper out of my garden, cilantro, and lime juice. You can add salt if you want to. I use organic tomatoes because tomatoes are heavily sprayed. You know it's organic. If you look at the tag and it starts with a 9, that's organic. I've heard people tell me that some labels that start with a 4 are organic, but I wasn't aware of that. At the farm store, this is a conventional onion. At the farm store that we were at on Sunday, they had, just like spring onions, they had conventional, usually dried onions right out of the fields, and they were just like a big spring onion. So I used that for this recipe, finely diced, and they had a softer flavor. The other thing that I want to show you as well is that when I serve this, sprinkled over it lime juice to freshen up anytime you use mushrooms or, well, actually with anything. Any kind of a legume, any kind of a bean, anything that you want to add a little bit more flavor to. Consider using lime. And this is one of the easier, or lemon. This is one of the easier of the devices to squeeze it. And then also toss on a little bit, well, let me toss this in first, a little bit of cilantro to give this color. And last night, because I wanted to add even more color, I added just a few pieces of tomato from the pico de gallo scattered on it. Fresh flavor, a little bit of extra lime, and you can see it adds a nice color to it. All right, so what I have here is pico de gallo, shredded red cabbage. You could do shredded white cabbage, but the red gives you so much more nourishment. I have what I call broken olives. I eat olives, love olives. And what I mean by broken is I buy an organic olive, and it's hard to find sliced olives organic. And so I don't want to take the time to slice them. And instead, I simply break it. Just do that. And it breaks the olive. And I actually like the broken olive on the taco because it's not a roly-poly olive. And yet I haven't had to take the time to slice the entire can of them. And then we have sliced spring onion. And then let me show you a fast way to do your avocado. Now I could add to this avocado garlic powder. I use granulated garlic, granulated onion, but instead, and you can, if you want a little bit of a saltiness, you could add some lemon that sort of gives you that salty kind of a flavor, or Benson's Table Tasty. But score the avocado in its shell. And after you put it in the bowl, you can then season it a little bit and squeeze over a little bit of that lime I was showing you. And then just scoop it out. And what you're scooping out is a chopped avocado, because you've scored it and you've created a dice there. So now we have, and the avocado will go. Yesterday we had 2 avocados. I could have easily have done 3. All right. And I think that's that. So if we made this, we would put a scoop in each taco, and you don't use a lot because the filling is a good base, but the rest of it, well, we'd start with, well, let's put some cabbage in first and a little bit of olive.
You know how I cut my olives is I use an old egg slicer.
Do you?
Yeah, and it cuts them really fast and perfect.
Oh my goodness, I hadn't thought about that. And we've got a little bit of tomato, pico de gallo, some cilantro, and a touch of the avocado. And then I thin sliced some jalapeno peppers and 1 poblano pepper. And take a look. See what a pretty taco that is? And you could fill it with more lettuce, more vegetables. And on the plate, you have this wonderful rice. And then, when all is finished, and I wanted to also mention the California balsamic glazing habanero, balsamic dressing or balsamic vinegar. I sprinkled some of this on mine last night and it was delicious. And Chef AJ is going to, with Thomas Allen, who produces the balsamics, she's going to be doing having a conversation with Lifestyle Medicine's Dr. Dysinger and Thomas about the value of using the vinegars that are salt, oil, and sugar-free to add flavor to whole food, plant-based diets. And you may want to consider joining. I believe if you go to Facebook.com/lifestyle medical group, the event is right there on their Facebook page. A couple of raspberries, a little bit of mint, and you have dessert. All right. Does anyone have any questions?
Yeah, I saw one. Hope said, do you have to soak it? If you soak the jicama, does it get softer? And Melissa says, where do you find your tortillas?
We have, okay, about the jicama, it doesn't get softer, it just gets more moist. Jicama, if it's old and dehydrated, can be rather fibrous. And yet, it is one of the foods that Joel Fuhrman recommends as a resistant starch. It's a great, healthy starch. So by soaking it, you add a little bit more moisture to it so that you get a nice crunch, and it almost increases the sweetness in an odd way. When it's fibrous, it's not as pleasant to eat. And about the tortilla, the Mi Rancho I've seen at Ralph's, and I get it at one of our nearby healthy living stores. It's called Clark's here in Southern California, but I would imagine you'd find it at Sprouts, at Whole Foods. I don't know if you can find it online. I haven't tried, but if you can, consider their thin edibles, because in my air fryer, my Breville Smart Oven air fryer, I make my tortilla chips. We even make our own tortilla chips, and we use these thin edibles, and it gives us a very crispy, thin taco chip, cutting this into 6 quadrants, and I can do 5 of them at once in 6 quadrants each, and in 6 minutes in the oven at 375, and it's just delicious.
Nice. Have you ever bought the jicama tortillas at Trader Joe's?
Yes, and I couldn't figure out what to do with them.
Well, now you know you can make little tacos.
Well, I didn't. I just didn't, and I didn't buy them again because they didn't impress me, and I knew it was because I'm just not thinking well enough about what to do with them. Oh, and then this vegan sour cream on this is so cooling and so delicious that it gives you everything you would want in a taco. The flavorful meat as well as the combination of vegetables and the Latin flavor. And then your cool and delicious chocolate pudding. Anything else?
No, it just looks like a veritable Mexican fiesta.
It is. I'll finish what I began to say about turning 70. It was in July of 2020 that I looked ahead and said in January, first part of January, I'm going to be 70. I'm healthier than I've been ever because I went through my adult years with an eating disorder. And I finally got that taken care of. I overcame that. It's been almost 3 years. Oh, it's been more than 3 years now. And I thought, I'm healthier than ever on my whole food plant-based diet. And I am going into 70 and feel like I'm soaring. And I thought, there's a story here. So I decided I should write a book about that, because I had also been for 3 years with Dr. Dysinger, who is a founding member of the College of Lifestyle Medicine at our lifestyle medical general practice. And I thought, there's a book here. So I wrote it, Aging Powerfully, and it's a Amazon bestseller. And there's my story in it. So there's a bit memoir of my memoir, but also the most important part of it is 10 lifestyle tenets, including the pillars of lifestyle medicine, all outlined in the anagram powerfully, POWERFULLY. And it's a very helpful reminder that we are completely in control of our own health based on the way we live our lives, which includes whole food, plant-based eating, and paying attention to people like Chef AJ, because I don't know of anybody else who has put more energy into not only learning and living it, but also teaching it to us. And now with how many interviews have you done, Chef AJ?
Oh, let me tell you, I can tell you, you are number 521.
Nobody, absolutely nobody, has undertaken anything like what she has done. That began on what, March 20th?
March 20th, 2020.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I've learned so much, and I've been so inspired, and it's made an enormous difference. And so anyone that needs to know how to do it, take her courses, can watch her videos, can listen to her daily and the people she interviews, and learn a enormous amount. And I thank you that you're here today and paying attention to what I have to say.
Well, thank you. And people are just blown away. They say you do not look 70, and you can see that she doesn't. This is a wonderful book. I've been posting the link in the chat and in the show notes, and that's where most of the recipes, where people have to understand that YouTube limits us to 5,000 characters. So I put in as many recipes as I could fit. The rest I'll have to hop on over to your website to get.
Okay. All right. Thank you all for being with us today. Have a great day, because I know I'm going to.
Well, yeah, with all that food, how could you not? I mean, that looks absolutely beautiful. Thank you so much for the wonderful presentation, Nan.
You're welcome, and thank you.
Oh,
Bye-bye.
my pleasure. And thanks all of you for watching another episode of Chef AJ Live. Please come back tomorrow when we have a double feature. At 11 a.m., we have Dr. Jeffrey Pierce from Plant-Based Telehealth. He works with Dr. Lori Marbus, who's been on the show. It's been my first time meeting him. And at 2 p.m., another wonderful cooking demo from my friends at Local Spicery that have some of the best SOS-free spices. Nan, if you haven't tried the pepperoni spice, you've got to try that one. It's so good.
Oh, I will. And when I spent 10 days at True North. I walked down to, because aren't they just down the block from True North?
I think you're thinking of a different, there's a savory spice up there. Local Spice is actually in Tiburon.
Oh, okay. Then no, I don't know them. So I'll have to try that. Thank you.
Yep. And anybody orders, he'll give 2 free small samples. They have really, really wonderful spices. So thanks again. And I know you're going to enjoy your lunch, and so will your husband.
Thank you.
Okay, take care, guys. And check out Aging Powerfully. Bye-bye.